This past Labor Day weekend, Emmy, Fuzz, and Sam and I flew up to Pittsburgh to join the family in two great events. The first was to celebrate Bob Shemovitz's 90th birthday, and the following day we went to the wedding of Bob and Sheila's son, Max Shemovitz, to Christina Hatcher, a young lady he has been living with in Washington, D.C. Actually, Emmy did not fly up with us. Fuzz and Sam and I flew up Thursday afternoon. Emmy came up Friday afternoon. Friday morning, we drove over to the Shemovitz apartment, which was in the Medical Center and the Carnegie Museum Center. We went up to the apartment. We were met by the children of the Nelsons. That's Elliot, who is 12. Benjamin, I think, is 10, and Leah is about 8. They met us at the door. Elliot, whom we call Ellie, is my pen pal. They live in London, and we write each other actual letters. We agreed no emails. So this was my first meeting with Ellie, and I was so delighted. He's a beautiful young man. He's tall for his age, has a great smile. Anyway, we went in. The party for Bob was in full swing. Everybody was running around, hugging, kissing, taking pictures. I found myself a place on the sofa and watched the proceedings. I invited people to come over and sit with me so I could talk and find out something about them. The party had invited a large number of people. Those coming from the furthest distance were Danny Shemovitz and his wife and their 3 children. I guess the next group came from London. That was the Nilsons. Julia Nilsson is Bob and Sheila's daughter. Her husband is Brad. First thing I did was to take one of the Israeli boys and invite him to my sofa, and we talked. His name is Aitan. He's the oldest of the 3 children. He's in the Army, and he's in Army intelligence. He seemed very serious. I told him I remembered when he had been traveling. He said he didn't remember traveling. I said, yes, you were a kind of ambassador, and you went to, I think it was Toronto, Canada, went to a large group there talking about Israel and its relationship with Canada. He said, yes, I did go there. Then the second son is Noam. He's also in the Army. I didn't get a lot of time with him. And then the teenager daughter, she's about 15 or 16 and quite beautiful. I talked to several people, Bonnie Crow, who came from Florida with her husband John, um, a lady whom I don't remember. She talked about her family having some kind of family business that she and her husband worked on, and then when she retired, she turned it over to her children. I took pictures with Sheila, took pictures with Julia, took pictures with Bob. He sat with me and we talked for a while. He was so excited to see people from all over, and was especially pleased that Ellie, his grandson, had come to celebrate the party with him. Soon there was a birthday cake, candles lit, and Bob blew it out, and we all feasted on a very delicious white cake. The party soon broke up, and Fuzz and Sandy and I went over to the Carnegie Museums. One is a Carnegie Museum of Natural History, where I spent a lot of time when I was growing up. Whenever I went to Pittsburgh, sometimes I went with my parents. They would drop me off at the Museum of Natural History while they went shopping for shoes and sometimes for groceries for where we could get kosher in Logan Street. There is also the museum, Carnegie Museum of Fine Art, that we decided we would go to. Brian had also gone to that. There was not a lot to be seen. There was a special exhibit of large photographs of African American baseball players. Then we went to the part of the museum that contained some modern art and some impressionist art. There was not a great deal of it, but one thing we admired was a statue by Giacometti, about 4.5 feet tall, a very thin representation of a man in black metal, probably bronze. He was laid out very thin arms and legs, thin legs in a walking position, and a very thin head. I remember meeting Yvette in one of the Northern European countries, and we went to a museum called Louisiana, named after Louisa, the wife of the man who dedicated the museum. This Giacometti walking man was about 15 feet tall. From there, we got into the car and headed for the Pittsburgh airport. We picked up Emily and decided that there was time remaining in the afternoon, so we went to Aliquippa town about 20 miles from Pittsburgh, a town of about 25,000 people when I lived there, a town where I was raised, went to elementary and in high school. So I had a lot of interest in seeing what remained of Aliquippa. I heard that inasmuch as the only industry, which was Jones and Laughlin steel mill, had closed down, there really were no jobs in the community. So the older men couldn't leave town, they couldn't leave their houses, they couldn't sell their houses, and the young men and their wives left town to find jobs elsewhere. So we drove around while I pointed out buildings and streets and other items that I was familiar with. The main street, Franklin Avenue, was long and curved. On the main street, main part of Franklin Avenue, where there had been a lot of stores and a company store, a lot of them had just deteriorated and had been carted away, so that large areas of Franklin Avenue was bare. The area where there were Jackson shoe stores, one at 310 Franklin Avenue and the one about 380 Franklin Avenue, those commercial areas were gone and cleaned up. The Woodlawn Trust Bank was some kind of large supermarket. I saw people walking in and out, but it was no longer a bank. Across the bank was a 3-story apartment house. We lived in the second story apartment at the back. That was 395 Franklin Avenue. When we lived there, I would go downstairs and out to the alley behind the apartment building and walk up through the trees and brush and bushes to Highland Avenue, which had a lot of houses on both sides, probably, I would say, middle class. But at the other end of the street where I entered it was Highland Avenue, Highland Elementary School. It was no longer there. We drove around there to see that area. Then we drove further along Franklin Avenue. The only buildings remaining were that of a drugstore and a couple of small businesses that I couldn't find out, couldn't determine what they were. There were 2 theaters in Aliquippa. The Strand was definitely for Class B or C movies, cowboy movies, and Saturday afternoon serials. The State was up at the other end of the business, and that's where Mother and Dad and Evie and I went to Friday evening movies if we weren't going to Sabbath services. We drove up further up the street, saw the uh, Memorial Library, which was an outstanding building, and decided to go in. It was a reasonably large structure, looked the same as it did when I was in school. I would go there practically every night, Monday through Thursday, and do my studying there because it had books and encyclopedias and reference books. We went through the disabled door because I was using a walker. We took the elevator and went up to the main floor. The first room we came to was a large room, a reference room that had encyclopedias and special books that were used, I remember using for my classes in high school. The next room was a reading room that had lamps at each seating place at each table, and had large windows on two walls, one group of windows to the front street, that would be Franklin Avenue, and the other looking downtown. Then we went into the lobby, which had gates of bronze on each side, and the next room was the adult reading room. By that time, we met the librarian for the day, who was Cindy Murphy. She was excited that we were interested in seeing what the library had come to, and was excited to know that I was, as a student, I had spent a lot of time there. She said the library had been built in 1927 with funds given to the community by B.F. Jones, who with his partner Laughlin had erected the steel mill, and they were very big in the steel business in that part of Pennsylvania. The building, as I said, was opened in 1927, but then fell when the town began to deteriorate and was hardly used at all. And Cindy and her husband Ed felt very strongly that the library was important, and so they raised $1.5 million and used that, and plus other funds, to put the library back in good shape. She told us all about parts of the library, took us into the adult reading room where there were a number of women eating and reading books, and then she took us into what was the children's reading room. It had a beautiful glass-leaded window with features of fairy tales. It had now become Cindy's office. She showed us a painting, folk art painting, looking at Aliquippa from the distance, and featuring Jones Laughlin Steel Mill, the Aliquippa High School, the company 4-story building and other features of the commercial area along Franklin Avenue. She then took us into the basement. At one time, it had been a place for a meeting and a lecture room, but she had converted it into a place for children as a reading room and a place where children were read to and featured fairy tales and grim tales and so on. I purchased a copy of the painting, and then she showed us a book that she and Ed Murphy had put together with the help of Gino Paroli, a mill worker who had interested himself in the history of Aliquippa. And so we bought copies of that book to take home and read. From there, we went to the Orthodox synagogue for Shabbos services. Before that, everybody was taking pictures, but Brad Nilsson made a special effort to take pictures of the 4 surviving cousins of the Egger and Jackson family. That was myself, Bob Shemovitz, B. Egger Miller, and Irma Egger Morris. So we had pictures taken of us. Pictures included Marcia Shemovitz, David's widow. And then we all gathered, and Brad took several pictures of the whole group, which included people who were friends of the family, people who were planning to attend to the wedding, people who had come to Bob's birthday party, but not those who came to the birthday party and were not invited to the wedding. After pictures were taken, we moved to the tables. There were 10 round tables and 10 seats at each one, if I'm correct. So there was a large gathering. There were prayers over the wine, prayers over the challah, and then we were served a meal of salad, chicken, and a white cake. I managed to talk to several people to find out about them, particularly Irma and her daughter Marjorie and her husband Larry, who now run the Egger Jewelry Store in Coraopolis. Then I went to the bride and groom, introduced myself, and asked them about what they did. Max said he was a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. And Christina worked in the Department of Energy. From there, we went back to the hotel, packed up, and went to the Seven Springs Resort in the Pennsylvania Hills. Beautiful area, lots of trees, lots of bushes, areas cleaned for skiing, hiking. There was rain, but that added to the beauty of the place. The morning or early afternoon, we went to a picnic to a grassy area. There was a covered building, so when it rained, it didn't bother us. I took the opportunity to talk with Ellie, my pen pal. He was wearing the Texas t-shirt I brought him, and he and I talked while I ate bratwurst, which was uh, delicious, oily, but absolutely wonderful to taste. I Ellie was interested in what kind of doctor I was. I told him I was an internist and I was interested in lung disease. He asked me if I cut people. I said no, I just talked to them and did tests and did my best to make them well. He pointed to his grandfather, Bob Shenvitz, and said, he's a stomach doctor. So we took pictures, more pictures, and then more pictures. We went back to our hotel at Seven Springs. The next morning, we played gin rummy. Emily beat me and Sandy and Fuzz beat Sandy. So the only unbeaten were Emmy and Fuzz. I think at some future time they're going to play the grand match to see who's a champion in the family. We dressed and drove to the site where the wedding was held, which is the farm that Bob and Sheila have. Bob had spent time there riding his horses as a great way to relax from his practice. The farm is up on the top of a hill. The area was a lot of grass had been cut short, and all around there were trees all around, so the area was clear. There were two tents. One was a small one, about the size of a half a tennis court, and that's where the wedding was held. There was a large tent which was set aside for the wedding reception. We took chairs in the small tent and waited for the wedding to proceed. The first was the chuppah was brought in by several strong-armed individuals. Then Ellie came in. I think he was probably the ring bearer, followed by his sister Leah. Then Max came, accompanied by Bob and Sheila, and he positioned himself in front of the rabbi where he waited for Christina. She came accompanied by her father, Fred Hatcher, and Fred's girlfriend, Janice Liss. She came dressed in a beautiful white dress and carrying a bouquet of red flowers, which was such an interesting difference from the usual white bouquet or mixture of flowers. She placed herself with Max in front of the rabbi. The rabbi began the ceremony. She sang part of it. She spoke part of it, explained part of the ceremony that Max and Christina went through for the marriage. At the end, of course, Max stepped on a glass, following which everybody yelled, Mazel Tov. I might mention that in the chuppah was a tallis that belonged to Morris Shambovitz. That would be Max's grandfather, Bob's father. It's a beautiful one. I remember his wearing it during the high holidays. Then we dismissed the group for the wedding and went to the reception tent where we ate, where the group sang, danced, made speeches, took pictures, and in general had a great time. As time got on, it became darker, very late, and it was time to break up, to go back to the hotel. It was very difficult for me to go up the hill to get to the wedding place, the wedding tent, but it was very dark now. So they sent a electric cart that picked up me and my walker and Sandy. So we had no trouble getting back to our car. Thus ended a lovely weekend. We went back to the hotel and the following morning headed for the Pittsburgh airport and home. It was a marvelous, marvelous weekend.